a mystery that is only deepening. That's into Russia's arrest of an American citizen and ex-Marine, Paul Whelan, on espionage charges. The U.S. and Whelan's family denies charges that he is a spy, but new facts emerging today do raise questions about him, including the fact that the Canadian-born security expert also holds Irish and UK passports. Now, the British Foreign Office has requested consular access to Whelan, and UK Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt had this to say.
We're extremely worried about Paul Whelan. We have offered consular assistance. The US are leading on this because he's a British and American citizen. But our position is very, very clear, which is a very straightforward point that individuals should not be used as pawns of diplomatic leverage. And, you know, we need to see what these charges are against him, understand whether there is a case or not. We are giving every support that we can. But we don't agree with individuals being used in diplomatic chess games.
And from the Whelan family, this statement today. We are relieved and very pleased to know that the staff of the U.S. Embassy in Moscow have been given consular access to Paul and confirm that he is safe. We urge the U.S. Congress and the State Department to help on Paul's behalf to secure his release. Well, for more on this, we're going to be joined from Washington by Mark Simakovsky. He is the non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and also a former chief of staff to Europe NATO, policy office of the Secretary of Defense. But first, let's go to Moscow and speak to a journalist, senior foreign policy writer at Gazeta.ru, Alexander Bratersky. Alexander, let me start with you. How is this story being covered, being portrayed there in Russia?
Well, of course, the state media just told about, the U.S. spy being caught. And of course, a lot of all those handy officials like the from United Russia Party have said that our security forces are working very well to protect our borders. But the liberal media, the popular media, the popular quality liberal media is actually very questioning, what's this really guy whereabouts? I tell you from my personal experience, my stepfather has spent 20 years in the foreign intelligence, and I know what a spies look like. This guy looks kind of strange. Maybe he's a kind of new kind of spy. I also check his, Vkontakte VK page, which is a similar Russian version of Facebook, where he has posted numerous, kind of Russophile messages and, about Russia and how President Putin is good and how Trump is good. But he also befriended a lot of Russians who were kind of like former soldiers, or some of them are former paratroopers. That seems very murky a little bit. So the guy has visited Russia many times. There was a picture in 2007 where he's holding a dog and staying in some shabby Russian apartments. So he was kind of a regular goer to Russia.
Well, Mark, let me ask you. A lot of questions being asked about Paul Whelan. He does seem to be an interesting character. To your judgment, does it add up to him being a spy acting on behalf of a Western intelligence service? I'm sorry. I'm asking Mark in Washington.
Oh, sorry.
Mark,
No, it doesn't. I mean, this man's background, of course, is something that needs to be focused on, particularly with military experience. The U.S. government is very careful in who it sends, if it does send people to Russia in non-diplomatic cover. I think this is more a case of reciprocity and deterrence. Reciprocity in that the Russian Federation feels that one of its citizens, an intelligence asset, Mrs. Butina, was detained in the United States, and this will be a pawn in trying to obtain her release. And deterrence in that Russia wants to prevent future Russian citizens who are working for the Russian government to be detained, knowing that Mr. Mueller's investigation is ongoing here in the United States. So this detention of Mr. Whelan is to send a signal to Washington that Russia will continue to take reciprocal action if there are any steps taken against its citizens in the United States. So in many ways, Mr. Whelan is a hostage and a pawn in a much larger game in U.S.-Russian relations.
And if that is the case, how should the Trump administration react, Mark?
I think they obviously should express concern about this detention. Clearly, the U.S. government is developing a response at the highest levels. Mr. Pompeo is the one in charge now of focusing on this effort because the State Department is responsible for consular access. But again, if this man has no intelligence activities, the U.S. should press for his release and shouldn't walk down the aisle of trading what clearly is a Russian intelligence asset for someone that was picked up off the street to be used as bait. And again, I think the U.S. should continue to put pressure on the Russian Federation to release him, particularly if there's no real evidence of his espionage activities.
Alexander, would the Kremlin really pick up a U.S. citizen and hold him as a prisoner, as bait?
It's possible, but, I mean, Mr. Whelan is not kind of a guy that, Kremlin would exchange for, let's say, a person like Mrs. Butina, for example. There are a lot of Russians, the Russians who work for Americans and, who have been charged with espionage, they're serving jail time in Russian prisons. Americans would be much more interested. I can only assume that this man might be working for someone, let's say some private intelligence or some of them other people, might be used by someone, for those matters, right? It seems to be strange that intelligence officials could use the guy who was actually charged with, some crimes when he was in the Marines. The Marines are very prestigious. So if in case somebody fails to do something right, it's very bad that if somebody could, use him. It means he's not a reliable asset. And it's the whole question, Mr. Whelan, is actually makes a very interesting New Year and Christmas story. So I don't think so. I think he might be released, soon, but I don't think so. He would be exchanged for someone. He's not a kind of a guy to be exchanged for some really serious person.
Mark, I just want to ask you, I mean, from what we understand that this woman, Marie Butina, has reached a deal with U.S. prosecutors. We're going to assume that she's told them what she knows. From what I understand, the prison sentence will not be a lengthy one. So why would the Kremlin, in a sense, take this action to get an asset back who perhaps will be coming back home soon anyway?
One, I think, is partly because Russia hadn't responded yet to Butina. So many would say in the Russian security services that this action was long overdue. And why did Russia wait so long to detain an American citizen? To showcase that it also will take reciprocal measures when it feels that its interests are threatened. So I think one way is to, again, reinforce that Russia will respond and is now responding to Butina's arrest. Another potentially is her removal from the United States is not a foregone conclusion. She's going to have to cooperate with the investigators. She's obviously been offered a plea deal. But maybe to hasten her departure and to ensure that she comes back to Mother Russia faster than otherwise, Russia feels it's in its interest to detain an American citizen to potentially hasten that withdrawal. So, again, I don't think this is a case whose end has come to its conclusion, and the Russians just made it a little bit more interesting.